All right, Chelsea fans, welcome back to another episode. That's right, of the London is Blue podcast, hopefully your favorite Chelsea podcast, after an 8 or 9 pod week where we are just dropping as many episodes as possible. It's very hard to keep up with Chelsea right now, but Dan, one of your hosts here, trying to make sure that we get you as much of the latest information as it happens, because Chelsea are just continuing to roller coaster their way through the transfer window. Look, one game a week means there's a lot of conversation about everything else going on. But today, we're getting an opportunity to dive a little bit deeper to talk about Romeo Lavia, who was announced today on Friday, the 18th of August, officially as a Chelsea player. A super exciting time for us and a super exciting time for you, because we have the wonderful, the detailed, the individual who seemingly can stop time to do research and then resume it to come back and join a podcast with us, because I don't know how he fits all the match watching in, the analysis in. You know him, the great, the amazing Sam, CFCCentral, coming back again to give us everything we need to know on Lavia. And Sam, we just want to make sure, how you doing? How you feeling? You got the weekend off ahead of you too, so there's going to be a little less football on your mind, on your brain. I think it's a healthy thing.
Well, it has been a brutal week, to be honest. I've just been watching game after game, and the gods have been kind. I think Tyler Adams fell through, Michael Olise fell through. So I'm counting my blessings and just trying to focus as much as I can on the new guys that we've got. It is an exciting time to be a Chelsea fan, but I think after a certain point in time, you do start to feel the saturation creep in a bit. You're just like, get the season on, just let's concentrate on the football. And I think Pochettino will be thinking something similar. But if this is going to be the last signing that we make for the window, then what a signing it is. And it looks like we've got one of the gems, somebody who's been on the market in terms of on top clubs' radars for the longest time. So just really, really happy that we managed to snag him. And hopefully a couple of years down the line, it's going to pay dividends.
Well, plenty of people were in for Lavia. Plenty of people did not want to stump up to the valuation. And I think to the point you made about this potentially being the last signing, that feels more like a wish of yours to get a little bit of a break off of all of the detailed analysis. But I don't know if Chelsea's going to necessarily grant that wish. They don't seem to be a very kind genie all the time. So we might have to put that one back in the bottle for at least the next little bit. But look, we're going to get into all the things about Lavia. We're going to tell you a little bit about his background, his journey, his footballing journey. We're going to get you some information about his strengths, his weaknesses, where there's an opportunity to improve his game and how his game is going to help improve Pochettino's side. And then we're going to get into all of your listener questions. Boy, oh boy, you had a ton of them. And Sam has so thoughtfully curated them to make sure that we can get those main topics that you, the listener, wanted answered. So we just want to say thank you. This has been a really big week for us. It's been a big month for us. Thank you so much if you're leaving 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Thank you if you're joining and following us on YouTube. Thank you as well. We're on our push there for 30,000 subscribers. We're getting really, really close. So if you haven't done it already, go subscribe over there. Go hit the bell icon to get notified. That's a super great thing to do. And you can also join us on patreon.com/London Blue Pod. Join our wonderful Discord community and help support the podcast that way as well. And there's also Sam's newsletter too. So it's londonisblue.beehive, BEEHIIV.com. You can sign up there for next Wednesday when the 3rd edition of Sam's newsletter comes out. But that's going to do it for all of the self-promotion, the self-aggrandizing. We are going to get into the journey, the story of Romeo Lavia and the move that he has made to Chelsea from Southampton, facilitated a little bit by an individual named Joe Shields pushing and making sure that he got his guy into Cobham, into Chelsea. We saw the wonderful video where he was talking or FaceTiming with Eden Hazard, a fellow Belgian, which was a fun thing to see. Got people excited. Chelsea doing these very short teaser announcements right now. So, Sam, I'm going to sit back. I'm going to take a pause. I talk too much. People want to hear you. They want to hear the analysis that you have. So I'll let you tell the story and get us up to date on Lavia's journey.
No, I highly doubt that they want to listen to me more than you. You've got the better voice, the better presentation. I'm just the potato who turns up from time to time. So please do not be modest and make me feel over the top before I go on live. But yeah, I think this one's going to be sort of pretty short in terms of the background. I tried scouring the internet. I did find limited stuff on him, but so apparently he's of Ghanaian descent. He joined Anderlecht's academy when he was around 7 or 8 years old. And the turning point basically came for him at this tournament called the KDB Cup in 2018. Now, this tournament is organized by Kevin De Bruyne in his hometown. And it's sort of this format for under 15 kids, and clubs come from around the world and they compete. And in 2018, the chief guest of honor was Pep Guardiola, who was invited by De Bruyne to come watch the kids. And there was this one 14-year-old in this under 15 tournament who was wearing the captain's armband and then sort of impressed and caught his eye and ended up skippering Anderlecht to the number one position in the tournament. And this tournament had clubs like Paris Saint-Germain, Dortmund, Manchester City, and of course Chelsea. We finished seventh in the edition and Anderlecht got first. And Guardiola basically went back pretty impressed and he basically ended up going right to Manchester City a couple of years later. So a bit of opportunity meets luck. I think that happened with Lavia. It just happened to be in the right place at the right time. And he would then go on to play centre back for Anderlecht for a little bit of time. But because he didn't have the physical stature, because he wasn't very good in the air, he moved away and then he again went back to midfield. And again, by the age of 16, he was in Manchester City. People assumed he would be playing in the under 18s, the elite development squad, but he actually went on and made his debut for the reserves by 17. He was regularly starting for them. And then at that same age, he basically made his senior debut, which was incredible for a talent who had just turned 17 years old. So everybody's talking about him for the same reason. Somebody who's arguably nowhere close to his peak, but is still showing incredible signs of being a fantastic player. So just for an example, so there's a metric called plus minus, which is in basketball, people talk about it in terms of what a player's influence is. So plus minus is basically how many points the opponent were able to score when you were on the field versus when you were off the field. So it sort of calculates how effective you were personally to your team's fortunes on the pitch. And interestingly, Romeo Lavia was fourth and seventh in his two seasons in PL2. And the 9 games that he was missing for Southampton last season with injury, Southampton only won one single game. So you can tell that even at his age, he is pretty important to a club that had to go through relegation. So has every single possibility of becoming the heartbeat of a side, which is why we went on and paid 53 plus 5 million apparently for a 7-year deal. And now we welcome Romeo to the club and hopefully great things await.
Yeah, definitely a move that was on the books for a period of time. We know that every individual of Chelsea's scouting apparatus, has had an opportunity to get at least one of their guys into the organization. So there's been a little bit of an opportunity there. And that makes sense. If you've felt like you've done a great job of scouting wonderful talent before and building out an extensive network and seeing maybe that there's an opportunity to bring that individual into Chelsea because they're going to be plus positive on a footballing pitch. I don't think anybody is nefarious or disastrous enough to self-sabotage in the way to bring a player that they're not completely convinced would help upgrade Chelsea. And it feels like from the initial interview, from the initial pieces that are coming out, that Lavia is extremely excited. We know the transfer saga that went through over the past week or two where Liverpool were interested, but Lavia felt as if he was a second choice. He was the second choice option for Liverpool and not the first choice, whereas Chelsea have always been maintaining contact. We've read that about the transfer as well, that Chelsea put priority on Lavia even while going after Moises Caicedo, which seems like a difficult thing to do. But this is one element, Sam, where I think in the case of having a lot of cooks in the kitchen when it comes to our transfer business, the fact that we could have someone who was more direct with Lavia and someone who's more direct with Caicedo did give us a leg up in both of those competitions for those signatures.
Yeah, absolutely. I think at this point, Stamford Bridge does look like a coliseum, and they're just going to be people battling out each other for like starting spots. It does actually feel a lot like that, because then you've got 5 under 22 central midfielders with a lot to fight for and a lot to prove. I would say that any of these 5 guys could go up or down over the next 5-6 years. Like, we don't know, the kind of ceiling that has been given to even somebody like a Leslie Ogochukwu, who we've not even seen, we probably won't see this season. The kind of talent that Andre Santos has at the age of 17 when he was playing for Vasco in the second division, and what he showcased there. It could very easily, flip, and then we have like 2 completely different starters 3 years down the line. It's not out of the question. So it is interesting to see what the long-term strategy is going to be. But I think Lavia is somebody that you can throw right into that fray, and he wouldn't look out of place. There's a lot of room to grow. There are a lot of great ingredients to create a great recipe. And I think that's what the thinking is for the club. You find great talents and hope that they push each other towards greatness.
I can't believe you're already negating Ugochukwu's 1 minute and 5 touches this season for Chelsea before heading out on loan and just downsizing it completely to being unconsidered.
I'm a harsh scout. I mean, I definitely require more of a sample size before I consider it to be an appearance. So yeah, please forgive me. But yeah, I think we need to see a lot more of him, and hopefully next year.
Well, Leslie is not the topic of conversation for this episode, so we're going to take a very quick ad break, and when we get back, we're going to get all into Lavia's strengths and why you, as a Chelsea supporter, should be excited for what he's going to be bringing into the side, particularly if you did not watch a lot of Southampton last year, and honestly, who could blame you? So stay tuned, and we'll be right back. All right, Sam, there's a list of some pretty nice strengths that make up the profile of Romeo Lavia. I think there are things that I was excited and I thought we were going to see in here, some of the passing, the press resistance / evasion. But I think there are also a couple of things on the ball winning and the carrying that you put in here. So maybe let's go through the first couple and chat about them.
Yeah, I think the first strength, the standout strength that we would want to talk about is something that everybody will be familiar with. It's just his level of press evasion, how effective he is when he's just dancing away from pressure. It's extremely aesthetic to see, but it also is, I think, already at the age of 19, like pushing towards world-class potential. He has this innate understanding of where he is, where the pressure is coming from, how to get away from it. He has this lovely ability to slip away and then weave his way through. And he goes left and right. He can also spin completely and leave people for dead. So I think he's got a great arsenal in terms of being able to get away from the first phase of pressure and then link up play from the back to the front. So that is something that has been invaluable. I think Enzo is somebody who's arguably very established at it. Caicedo is more about being in pressure situations and releasing it quickly. So you won't see him carry it out or dribble out of trouble, but he will know where exactly the pass needs to go. And Lavia offers the same level of Enzo does at 19. And I think that's something that is his standout strength. I was reading this Opta analyst article before doing my research, and they had pointed out a great point saying that he was pressured more than any Southampton player last season with 18.8 pressures per 90. And he was able to complete 86.2% of his passes. And he completed 79% of his passes when he was pressured by an opponent, which was basically the same number with elite level talents and elite level central midfielders who play in a defensive position. So when you're looking at him, you basically have your first phase locked down. You can ask him to collect. He shows great willingness. He shows great amount of courage and confidence to go and ask for it. And I think that's the number one thing that you would want from a young midfielder, just wanting to take on that responsibility.
As you look at it, there's different types of press evasion. I think there's some who are just really good on the ball. There are some who are great at going head-to-head and being able to stand up and they want to make contact because they can bounce through it. There are other players who are very good with things like dropping the shoulder and creating the right type of separation. So even though maybe someone's close to him, they can navigate around them. When you think about the way that his press resistance, press evasion works, what are you noticing physically that in the way that he manages that? How is he going to be seen on the pitch? How is he going to make his way through the space?
The one thing I think is something that I've noticed, and is arguably something that I don't see often with midfielders his age, is the understanding of tempo, the understanding of time, even in a frantic side like Southampton, which completely lost its way through the season. There were moments where, he wasn't afraid of the ball. Everybody was trying to get it back to front as quickly as possible. And this guy was waiting. He was inviting pressure, and he wanted it. He basically wanted people charging at him before he found the right moment of releasing it. So speaks volumes about his understanding in terms of wanting to do a certain thing, knowing exactly the benefits of it. And it's just he utilizes his strengths very well. So when you talk about how he evades it, I think the number one thing he prefers is carrying or dribbling out of trouble. So what he will do is he will wait for you to run at him, and then after that he will drop his shoulder or he will feint and then send you one way, and then he'll easily just waltz past you to the other. And he does this consistently, where he's able to invite people onto him. And it's almost a Brighton kind of situation where you're baiting somebody to run at you, and then you evade the first line, and then you have more space to operate. So he does that very, very well. And it just, his maturity, his sense of composure, his understanding of time, rhythm, way past his years. It looks like something that a 25, 26-year-old midfielder would do in that situation. And then he's already showing it at 19, which is obviously a fantastic sign of things to come.
And I think there's interesting thought in the build-up phases as well when we talk about his passing. I know that we are just almost a week removed from the match against Liverpool, where we saw some of the great passing that Enzo was putting on display, the line-breaking passes that we've seen from Colwell in preseason, that we're getting another individual who is going to be able to help progress the ball effectively and help Chelsea achieve or be a part of that quicker moving operation that we didn't always see last season.
Yeah, so I would sort of caution again here right now, saying that in terms of what Enzo and Colwell are able to provide, those are the higher level, the upper spectrum of the exquisite nature of progressive passes.
Graduate courses. They're the graduate course, and maybe you still have a little bit of work that Lavia is doing from qualifying or getting into college. He hasn't gotten the degree on it yet.
Absolutely. And I think he will look at those players and probably be, very eager to offer a similar level of output. But I think what Lavia does or has done at Southampton is he tries to progress it through shorter passes. So he will carry, he will invite pressure, and then he'll move it on to somebody who's more capable of finding players in the next half. So maybe a James Ward-Prowse, maybe he'll try to find a dropping centre forward in Armstrong or Adams or anybody else who's offering themselves up. So compared to Enzo and Colwell, who are very progressive, who are looking two lines down and they're trying to break the last line, Lavia is a little more conservative, but he has shown flashes of the Enzo/Colwell level of pass as well. There was this incredible pass against Newcastle where he was on his stronger foot and everybody thought that he was going to pass, and he just switched it onto his weaker foot and he fizzed a through ball past like 8 watching Newcastle players into the last line. And I was like, what the hell? Where did that come from? And it was that level of brilliance that he shows in flashes. So it's not like he doesn't have it in his locker. It's just sometimes playing for a bad team, sometimes being in a difficult situation as a young player, you tend to hold yourself back. You tend to rein certain tendencies back. Ruben Sayes was also somebody who was pretty harsh with him, saying that, I don't think he's a great player or something along those lines, saying that he needs to show it to me instead of like fostering his confidence. He just said, I don't think he's there yet. And it was a pretty harsh way of welcoming him to the reality of the relegation dogfight. So I think that will improve with time. But you want those little bits of evidence to show that there is something in the toolbox. this guy's not using it, but it's there. And I think that's what I saw.
Got it. And so I think the last kind of area of the strength that he provides is really some of the middle third ball winning. So effectively owning the middle of the pitch and making sure that Chelsea does two things right. They don't find themselves in trouble in their final third, and that they can quickly get the ball back into the attacking third as they look to score some goals, start winning games, and really mount a true attack this season in the league.
Yeah, I think this point comes with a little bit of a caveat because Southampton did have to defend a lot. And when you are playing in the bottom half, I would say rooted to the bottom of the Premier League, you are going to try break wave after wave of attack coming at you. And that's exactly what Lavia had to do. So when you look at 187 possessions won, for example, the first impression is wow, like the numbers are incredible, but it was also because he was put under a ridiculous amount of pressure, which you don't want to do. So he does win the ball back quite often, but my concern is there is more enforced quantity rather than quality. And this is something that we'll talk about in the next section. But it was just, he does things well, but I think in a side which was enduring a lot, he had to do it. It's not like he did it by choice. So it does have its pros and cons. Obviously, when you're a young player, you want to face challenges and try to break them down when they're coming at you really quickly. But it can sort of also develop you the wrong way where you end up making decisions where you don't have to. So it is a fine line in terms of his development, but he is a good ball winner. His numbers speak for itself. It's just, how does the quality change in a side where you don't face that amount of attacks coming at you, and how are his instincts going to be, how is his decision making going to be? But other than that, like if I speak only for the evidence that I saw in terms of how well he defended, very good. He's usually somebody who's played as a defensive midfielder. He's played next to Ward-Prowse as well in a 4-4-2. He's also played as the DM, just a 4-1-4-1. So he's played as a conventional DM. And he tends to not press. He's somebody who's very standoffish. If you see the difference between most of our centre-backs and Disasi, you will see the same amount of contrast in terms of everybody wanting to be on the front foot. And Disasi is like, no, I'm going to stand back and I'm going to wait for things to come to me. So it's the difference there is Lavia likes to be on the back foot. He likes to see threats in front of him, and then he copes with it. So for a reactive defender, good numbers, good technique, but it's just interesting to see how that changes when he's playing at PL level. Obviously, Manchester City were pretty good in PL2, but then again, it's PL2 and not the first division. So that's one to keep an eye on.
So those are kind of the strengths that make up Lavia's profile, reasons why you want to get excited. After this break, we're going to get right into a little bit more about the opportunities that we think Lavia has, where his game might be able to be improved by playing with talented players like Caicedo, like Enzo, and the rest of the Chelsea team, and how Pochettino may be able to help improve him season over season as well. So stay tuned, and we will be right back. All right, Sam. So as we come out of the break here, we want to say he's a younger player. He had that season with Southampton. This is going to be, I think, an opportunity for him to step up and mitigate or grow this season in this Chelsea side. And we've seen plenty of examples of players who first season really, really good, but the second season they take an astronomical jump in terms of the level of performances they have. So I think we want to couch all of these weaknesses as not necessarily career defining, but on the fact that in a lot of these, you're going to see some season over season improvement from where we are even today, 6 weeks from now, half a year from now. Some of these may not be as much of a consideration. We're just calling out where there are the opportunities to improve.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just wanted it to be for the sake of transparency. Obviously, people are going to see the fee and going to demand, the final product saying, oh, we paid, almost 60 million. So why are these deficiencies there? But you have to remember, it's not him who asked us to pay that money. We paid for it because we thought that his ceiling was going to be incredible. And, what we saw in terms of what was available was extremely good to the eye and to the numbers. So this just has to be kept in mind. And I would also want to put a disclaimer saying where I project his position to be, on the field is a role that is perfected by midfielders around when they're 26, 27 years of age. If you look at classic defensive midfielders who are edging towards what the Italians call a regista. I know people have PTSD because we used to call Jorginho that, but when you look at that positional responsibility, a defensive midfielder who's not a hard tackler, not somebody who's an expert at the dark arts, but somebody who defends by keeping the ball and distributing it very well. Most of these guys peak around 26, 27. You look at Andrea Pirlo, probably an exception because he started very, very well. But again, he was like wine. He just became better with age. You look at Amrabat, for example, who's come to the fore at the World Cup, and he's like in his late 20s. Jorginho, for example, nobody knew what he was doing in Verona. And then after that, when he came to Napoli at the age of 24, 25, that's when his trajectory began and the Italian team integrated him. I think that's something that we will see with Lavia. And you have to remember that if he's showing these positive traits at 19, he has probably another 5 or 6 years before he irons those creases up. So patience is required. There will be times when you look at it and go, this is not what we paid for, but it's a difficult position. It's a complicated role. It requires a lot of responsibility, and give him the time he needs. Let him breathe.
So as we get into some of those, why don't we take a few of the ones that people are going to have questions about? I think how he positions himself one-on-one, the duels that he gets into, and maybe some of the things that definitely get reduced out over time, like being maybe over-assertive in a match. I think there's a list of a couple of things here that you would want, and you would imagine Pochettino and team are keeping an eye on to address and to coach up or coach out through the season.
Yeah, I think like Caicedo, the pod that we did, I would want to divide this into weaknesses and issues that can be improved. So when I look at weaknesses, I would say the first one that comes to the fore is his defensive positioning and reading of the game. He can be very naive. He tends to do things that he's not equipped to do. And especially when he's playing at defensive midfield, when he's supposed to be the last line of your defense in terms of the midfield section, the second line, he's supposed to be somebody who's reading threats coming in between lines and stopping those. He can leave his responsibilities. He's prone to sort of being erratic. A lot of the times you will see him marking somebody and then losing focus because the runner just runs past him into the box to try and make off the ball run, and he doesn't track back. He doesn't read those intentions very well. So I think that is something that I look at, and it happens very, very consistently. So defensive positioning is something that you have to be very, very careful with. Again, the caveat being that he played for a bad side, and it looked like sometimes the organization was not there at all. But on an individual level, when I'm seeing him perform his responsibilities, his duties, tactically in the system, it did look like he was naive. He needed to be a lot more attentive, a lot more responsible, and not be gung-ho with the kind of actions that he was doing. So that would be the number one thing that pops up very consistently. The second thing I would say is that he is a bit slow when he's closing down. Just his reaction time versus when he decides to push, there can be a delay, a half a second delay, a second delay, and that's when the window of opportunity is gone. In cricket, we have a terminology saying the corridor of uncertainty, and that's something that I would extend to when a player is receiving the ball. There is this ideal moment when you should press, when you should try to tackle, and I think Lavia just overcooks it sometimes, where there are obvious triggers. Somebody's standing on their heels, somebody's receiving on their weaker foot, somebody's got their back to goal completely, like they're standing in a flat stance. He should just be reading that before the ball comes to the player and then pushing. But he doesn't do that. He doesn't have the world-class reading that a lot of great defensive midfielders do. Again, that being contingent on age, but it's something that I would want to see evidence of, and I don't see a lot of it. So one that we have to be careful with.
Got it. And I think you would kind of highlight that there are other areas too. And I think that it'd be remiss of us in the act of transparency as we talk about the fact that we do have midfielders who are capable of more attacking support, that there really is not a a general sense that Lavia's game is or has a level of attacking nous to it. It almost feels like it would be just as shocking to see Lavia score a goal as it was when we saw Kovacic score goals for Chelsea.
Yeah, I mean, if he tried to shoot himself, he'd probably miss. Let's just say that. He's a very, very bad shooter, infrequent and hasty and very inaccurate. Again, his role doesn't require him to be that. I mean, he did score a very good goal against us, which always happens. Whoever we linked with, whoever we're trying to sign, they end up trying to prove a point and then score against us. And that's exactly what he did, after which he went off injured. But I wouldn't trust him to put a direct threat in there. There's a lot of times when he does get good opportunities to shoot, but doesn't take them. And the ones that he does take are, comparable to Rudiger. So occasionally he might get a 30-yard, yummy, delicious top corner pile driver, but most of the time might bring down a satellite or a floodlight. So wouldn't count on him for an attacking threat. So.
All right. Well, watch out, Starlink. Just watch out for those occasional missiles that he might try to fire into the air. What are the other ones? I know that there's usually questions about players, especially younger players, on the amount of mistakes they make from overcommitting, or even some of the concerns around, like, are they Premier League ready in terms of their kind of like physical stature or kind of musculature to be able to withstand some of the tackles. He did survive a full season in this Southampton side. Now the side did get relegated, but that's the responsibility of an entire organization and not just one player. We've seen multiple players leave Southampton and have good careers. So I don't think I want to make sure that nobody paints him with that brush, but I think as a younger individual who is going to be maturing throughout this process playing for Chelsea, those might be other areas where people are going to see growth, and that growth is just something that is a time-bound thing, not necessarily anything that he can really do about that in the moment, other than follow the advice of the nutrition and nutritionist on staff, and then also the other members of the organization who are working to get him in top physical condition.
Yeah, I think the point that ties in very well here is I would say it's subjective, because I've not had the privilege of seeing him in person, but from what I see on tape, I think there's something to do with his physical traits, his athleticism. It seems to be lacking in some places. I do feel like he's not great at covering ground. I do feel like he's not a Caicedo, he's not a Kante. He's not going to zip past and eat up 50 yards. He's not going to do that. His acceleration is not optimal over long distances. It also looks like he's not leggy. He's got short legs. And sometimes when he's chasing back and he has to make, defensive acts, he sort of tries to tackle, but then gets horribly wrong. He ends up fouling people. So I think maybe there's some biomechanical issues there that I'm not certain of, but it does look like physically he does struggle in some places. His strength, he gets brushed off. There was this time when I was watching him against Kaoru Mitoma, and he got basically thrown off. I don't know if it was balance or if it was just his center of gravity. Something looks odd when he's doing it. Also looks like whenever he does go for any defensive acts, he goes with a lot of aggression. And because he can't stop himself, he ends up like overrunning it. And this is something that happens with his 1v1 defending, which I would also highlight is a weakness. And especially if you're going to play our system, which is currently 4-2-3-1, then you want your defensive midfielders to be able to defend wide as well. And that's where I think if you play Lavia, then you could, the opposition could have a little bit of joy, because he tends to struggle. He can be quite susceptible there. They can't keep up with long-range threats. Somebody tries sprinting past him, they'll probably get the better of him. And again, his aggression can be a counterpoint here, where he's trying to act and then he completely misses it, and then he's taken out of the game. So I would say, just listen to Taylor Swift, Romeo, take me somewhere we can be alone, and just like isolate him, take your opponent where you can go and slow him down and then act. But he tends to be very hasty. And like you said, I think that is youthful exuberance at its best, trying to do things that you're not supposed to do. this is something that probably may happen either because of nerves or because of his natural tendency, but tries to go for the spectacular. He wins the ball back very well, and then he'll try a line breaking pass between three players. Why do you need to do that? He just needs to hold it back a little bit. So I would say that it's a little bit of physical, a little bit of mental. I'm more worried about the physical thing. The mental thing that I think will take care of itself. But if he's still growing, and if in like 6 months or a year he's grown into his body, like the scouts are talking about Ugochukwu, that he still has to fill in his body. I think if that happens with Lavia, then we shouldn't have an issue. I hope it's not this situation that happened with guys like Havertz and Loftus-Cheek, where they suddenly had a growth spurt and couldn't handle their own bodies. Like they couldn't understand why they were not controlling things and why their back was aching and stuff like that. I don't know if that's happened with Lavia in terms of his strength, in terms of how he's growing, but yeah, just something subjective. I wouldn't ask you to take this as gospel.
Well, hopefully he doesn't build up a reputation for that and become, as Taylor Swift would say, the anti-hero in the situation that we have. But that's kind of the roundup on the weaknesses or areas of his game that we're looking for Lavia to improve upon this season. There are plenty of questions from our listeners. There was individuals like Karen, Chelsea Animated, and Marquez asking really about what the fit is now. The fit of having Caicedo, having Enzo, not Endo, and having Lavia as our midfield 3 or midfield 2 with some rotation. To me, Sam, it feels like without Nkunku, it becomes a simpler equation to answer, and that a midfield 3 makes way more sense in how we might want to set up, how we might want to play. But I'd be eager, and I'm sure the listeners are very eager to hear your thoughts on the tactical setup that we might see Pochettino employ, not this weekend against West Ham, but maybe in the coming match against Luton Town or in the next few matches.
Yeah, I think we touched upon this on the Caicedo pod. It would be very interesting to see what Pochettino is thinking of, because if he does go for a 3-man midfield, then the entire preseason is thrown in jeopardy, because we did start with 4-2-3-1 in all our preseason games, and then we also went in the same thing for Liverpool, albeit with a little tactical tweak where Colville was playing LB and then Chilwell was basically playing left wing. So I don't know if he goes for a 3-man midfield. We've seen that out of possession. I've not seen how it works in possession, but that would make the most amount of sense considering you don't have an attacking midfielder. And if you do, then you have to use Kani Chukwuemeka, and you have to use like Conor Gallagher, for example. And those guys have performed okay, but again, it's a question mark on whether they'll be good enough until Nkunku comes back in January. So maybe we go for a 3-man midfield. We talked about the alternative solution, which has received a little bit of like praise and flack, both in equal measure, about Enzo Fernandez maybe becoming the number 10. He has played that role in the past, and it sort of frees him up from the responsibility of having to drop back and defend in transition, because he's got a little bit of leeway with 2 other midfielders back. And then you also have the additional, insurance of having 2 guys who are in that double pivot instead of leaving either Caicedo or Romeo Lavia to do the work there. But I think those 2 options are available to Pochettino. I think the simpler one would be to just go with a 3-man midfield. He's played that at Spurs. He's played that at PSG. But again, that would mean different tactical instructions, different orientations, maybe different shapes. But I think I expect it to be a 3-man midfield, but not surprised if Enzo moves to number 10.
Very interesting. As we talk about the ideal role for Lavia in this setup, I think the 6, like developing him into a true defensive midfielder 6, is probably where I think he might have the highest ceiling. But do you have a different thought about Ollie's question on where he should try to specialize, where he should try to round out his game?
I think this one's an interesting one because, trust Ollie to come up with that. But I think he's probably not a defensive midfielder for me now as of this moment. I think he lacks a lot of, like, the most amount of deficiencies that he has in his game are all defensive related. And, the hints in the name, if you're not defending, then you're not a defensive midfielder. So he has played as the deepest person in a three-man midfield, but to be honest, he hasn't impressed me there. There was another question by somebody here in terms of, I think Newton, Arjun CFC, who asked which midfielder in the last 20 years is he more similar to? And Siddharth talked about which player is he similar to stylistically and in terms of gameplay. I think it would be nice to combine those two questions and say that to me, he seems probably like a Thiago Alcantara or like maybe a Marco Verratti. And both of those guys are people who had to find their own roles. They've been played as the deepest midfielders, but I would say that that's not where their strengths lie. And they've actually done pretty well as a box-to-box midfielder in a three-man midfield. You know, they play as the 8, but they also have this very strange role where they're helping in build-up and they end up having around 115 touches. So I think Lavia there, who's free from doing the defensive duty, but is also getting to do his favorite thing, which is receiving from the center backs, orchestrating, and then basically working in the middle third. I think that would be probably the ideal role for him. I don't think he's a Mateo Kovacic where he can cover ground back to front very, very quickly. But if you had to look at the references, then I would say probably slightly further ahead, slightly further ahead than the defensive midfielder, or with a more defensive midfielder like a Caicedo. In your double pivot, you play him in Enzo's role. Make him do the things that Enzo is doing at build up, allow him to push forward and link up play and do his defensive duties. Won't have the same amount of creativity maybe for the next year or so, but he has good things in his box. So give him Caicedo as a safety net and ask him to express himself, and I think you might get the best out of him.
So continuing the questions, we have one from Jess, recent appearance on the London's Blue podcast, talking about David Washington. She was asking about, could we see Lavia and Andre Santos playing together? And if so, which formation would be the most suitable for the two of them?
I think 4-2-3-1 works very well. I think Andre, the good thing with him is he's far more well-rounded than Lavia. I will go on record to say that I think he's probably the better bet or the better deal to become a more well-rounded central midfielder. So you could arguably ask him to do either of those roles, to, push forward, link up, attack, or like he's done for Brazil as the DM, just sit back, break up attacks, and help Lavia in build up. And I think he can do both those responsibilities. So if you're asking them to do a role together, then you would want Lavia again. What I would say is make him do the Enzo role, allow him to go forward, and then Andre Santos is the one who slots into centre back, who does a little bit of build-up duty and does the breaking up play in behind. I think when I'm looking at this in the larger scheme of things, I do think that the hierarchy has looked at Lavia as an Enzo competitor who we've got for 60 million and who arguably could be a 120 million player in the next couple of years. So instead of paying for that ready-made Enzo Fernandez, we've gone quickly for a PL talent who's shown a very high ceiling, and we'd arguably ask him to compete against Enzo in the next season. And that's my read.
Wow. Well, that is going to be what Ishan clearly clips to do the social promotion for this episode. As we get to the next question, which did ask, Newton and Siddhartha asking just who he's most similar to. Who are some examples of the type of midfielder that we could expect him? I know you already made some comparisons around how he's not really a Mateo Kovacic, but there are some other names I think that you've penciled in that might be good player comps. And even right now, you set a stage for where you think he could go. And if it's anything like in the realm of Enzo, that would be incredible.
Yeah, I think Enzo is also somebody who struggles with his defensive strengths, but his progression numbers and everything else that he does is so tremendous that you tend to forget that those things exist in his game. And I think it's the same with Lavia. I think if he can develop the right things to a point where you can ignore his weaknesses, then I don't think anybody would be complaining. So if I'm looking at comps, I did say that Verratti and Thiago, probably like two guys who I'm looking at, are similar in terms of how they play. Thiago is surprisingly, even for a guy his size, he's very good in defensive duels. He's very good at recoveries. So if he gets anywhere close to Thiago, I think he'll automatically be a 120 million player. I think what Pochettino really likes about him is arguably a parallel with a player that he coached at Spurs and ended up being, according to him, world class, Moussa Dembele. So I think somebody who played as a forward at Fulham and then was pulled deeper back and then became this guy who was press resistant. Nobody could shake him off. He was carrying balls through midfield. Nobody could touch him. And Pochettino basically said that he was, the spine of the unit. He was just a one-man link between attack and defense. And if you could get Lavia to do something like that, add Enzo's progression by passes and add Lavia's carries and line breaking passes, then you have an excellent, incisive midfielder in your hands. And I think those are the three things that I would look at, saying watch as much Moussa Dembele tape as you can and watch as much Thiago as you can. And if you get either, to closer to either of those players, then you've done your job right.
I think you might have a hard time convincing people who are listening to a Chelsea podcast to go back and watch Dembele at Spurs, though that might be a worthwhile exercise, at least for the YouTube machine from a highlight perspective.
I mean, Dan, I went back to watch 7 games of Southampton. So you could do just that much for me and watch a little bit of Tottenham when they were good. I have sat through relegation fodder of the worst kind of football known to man. So rubbing my head against a cheese grater for like hours and hours. So please do me this little bit of help and watch Moussa Dembele if you can, even if it's a comp. It'll be worth your time.
Well, that is going to set the stage for us in this episode in terms of Romeo Lavia. Hopefully this has given you a wonderful introduction to who he is as a player, what his weaknesses are, where he's going to potentially grow this season, where are the things that he's going to come in, hit the ground running, and be a wonderful contributor to his fellow midfielders, to Mauricio Pochettino, and how we as Chelsea supporters can embrace him as a new member of a side, and also with the fact that, he said no to Liverpool, which is always a good thing. I think he really started it at an absolute high, just like Moises Caicedo did in terms of saying yes to Chelsea and no to Liverpool. That does add a little bit of sweetness here as we finish off the Romeo Lavia Sunday.
No, for sure. I mean, I think people will be intrigued by him. Obviously, he is exciting and people have had a Premier League introduction to him. But I think patience is required. It's just, I would always preach this with younger players, irrespective of their price tag. Give them time. I missed out this weakness, but like something that I pointed out and probably something that he'll never be good at is his aerial stuff. Like he can't jump. And when he does jump, his headers just come off very awkward. When you want to jump and head the ball, you obviously head it when you're at the peak of your jump. And he somehow manages to head it like midway through his jump. And I've rarely seen somebody head it like that. So again, those things when I'm looking at, I'm like, can that be improved? Can that be coached out of his game? And how much of it is sort of open to correction and betterment? And I think that's the big question with Lavia. Like I said, I think it's a calculated gamble. I think it is overpay. I'll be very, very honest. I think we've overpaid by about 20 million for him, considering how many deficiencies he has in his game. But that's, again, me being completely miserly with my money. He has, in terms of his technical fundamentals, if he can just keep that consistent and start growing it to a point where he's expressing himself freely in a non-relegation system, which gives him a lot of the ball, allows him to express himself. If you see his FPREF chart, for example, in terms of passing, the quantities, short-term passes are all red, and the percentage is all green, which is a nice thing to see because Southampton just weren't letting him pass at all. So all those become green in a system which allows him a lot of the ball, take 100 touches, 115 touches, orchestrate, spread it, express yourself. And I think that's exactly what he needs at this point of his career. And he's got a Manchester City education. So hopefully that will hold him in good stead when he makes the next step up. And I'm very excited to see him. I think he could genuinely push Enzo in a year and a half, maybe even quicker, hopefully. And good things are on the way. Fingers crossed. eternal optimist.
Yeah, good things are always on the way when it's a podcast that we get a chance to do together and share this information with all of our wonderful fellow Chelsea supporters and get them excited for another new signing. But that's going to do it for this episode, because we're going to get Sam a weekend off, even though as we're discussing this, the links to the second goalkeeper may be starting to actually form a little bit or solidify with a bid. But we're not going to talk about that, Sam. We're done. We're just going to bypass it. We're going to close out this episode because we're going to get you on to a nice weekend away from staring at a screen.
No, I think I will be getting right down to working on a couple of other things. I have a couple of other players on my list that I need to watch. And like you mentioned, it's hard not to keep myself distracted away from it. But we might be going in for another center forward as well. So yeah, just my luck. Transfer season is upon us. But hopefully, once all of this is over and I can focus on the football, I shall hibernate. But until then, very happy.
Well, if you don't do it yourself, we might have to do a little Han Solo frozen in carbonite situation for you to force you to take a little bit of time away. But that's going to do it for this episode. No carbonite in this moment, but plenty of excitement at Chelsea and for Romeo Lavia. So until next time, Chelsea fans, leave 5-star reviews, follow us on YouTube, join us on patreon.com/LetItBluePod, and you know what to do until next time. Keep the blue flag flying high.